And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor here at Whiskey Politics. Hope everybody is doing well and is healthy. You can find Whiskey Politics on YouTube. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you're updated on new episodes. And you can also find us at ricochet.com. It's a great website. Great conversation, a lot of other podcasts on there as well. And you can also find us at Apple Podcasts. Please make sure you click on 5 stars if you're enjoying the show and leave us a quick review. Before bringing on our guest today, Carrie Severino, to discuss the Biden-Reade sexual allegations, further to our last interview with Mo Vela, who is the former senior advisor to Joe Biden, which is getting some colorful commentary on our platforms, including over at ricochet.com, I want to briefly discuss our philosophy here at Whiskey Politics. I believe context matters. I think that the truth will not be found from a purely red or a blue perspective, but somewhere in between. The reason that there are so many independents is because I think most people believe that and they realize this. You know, they say you never want to meet your heroes. And I've had the good fortune to speak and interview many of mine over the years. And the one thing you learn doing this is that human beings, all human beings, are fallible. Now, Whiskey Politics isn't a provocative right-wing talk show. Sure, we have a lot of guests that represent right-of-center thought. We have folks that represent leftist thought as well. And there are some discussions that we have that are purely apolitical altogether. And, you know, if you go back, for example, a couple of episodes, this was a fun one for us. We talked about the Hollywood high-level poker circuit and Mollie's game. Nothing to do with politics at all, and it was a fun discussion. Now, our last episode with Mo Vela, who was a senior advisor to Joe Biden and also advised Al Gore in the Clinton administration, was an opportunity for us to hear the perspective that half this country believes. I gave Mo the opportunity to discuss why he didn't think that there was hypocrisy coming from the left and the media regarding Tara Reade's accusations about Joe Biden after what we saw with the believe all women trope that the left and the media, and I know I repeat myself, essentially displayed during the Kavanaugh hearings. I wanted Mo to explain why he didn't think that Biden is mentally impaired. And while so many of us, especially on the right, but even folks on the left, are questioning his mental acuity, why he wasn't concerned about placing him as president of the United States when so many people are questioning that. I wanted to hear and understand why the left wasn't giving President Donald Trump credit when during the early days of the pandemic, while Nancy Pelosi was telling people to go and have dinner in Chinatown and officials in New York City were telling people to go out, President Donald Trump essentially shut down travel to China. How many lives did he save for that? And instead, they in turn called him a racist and a xenophobe. I wanted Mo to explain why Joe Biden's priority of choosing a woman for VP isn't identity politics. And I allowed him to present his views. I pushed back on some, respectfully, sometimes, you know, harder in places than others. And I'll admit there were some places I probably could have snowballed him with more facts. And to give him credit, he agreed with me on some of my arguments. But the key here is this. While neither he or I will change who we vote for based upon that one conversation, we showed that we didn't need to skewer each other just to make our points. I want the audience to make up their own minds, the goal being to have a conversation. And we hardly see that in the mainstream media anymore. Journalism, as we once knew it, is dead. And conversation today is loaded with gotchas trying to find that one clickbait headline. I don't think we learn anything from that beyond our already established echo chamber views. At a time when even people that I like and respect, some people have been on my show, you know, they resort to childish name calling, shaming, and attacking of others on places like Twitter. Listen, it's more important than ever, I think, for us to have dialogue with the other side. We don't have to agree. And in many cases, we will agree to disagree, but we are talking. There was one part of the discussion with Mo when he questioned my values. as Whiskey Politics producer Melissa Praemonitus said to me after the interview, she said that was a Linsky 101 tactics that he was using. His intent to question my economic philosophy, which determines my politics, was to ask why I don't focus on humanity. My response is simple. In short, it was free markets allow problems in humanity to be solved by individuals as opposed to government. People come out of poverty when the economy does well, not when bureaucrats design a new government program. And to his credit, he agreed and then told us why he had problems with Bernie's socialism. So again, it's about having a discussion. And yes, it's always fun to watch so-and-so destroy a liberal on YouTube. But who watches that besides those people that want to see liberals destroyed? Maybe I'm old school. I don't know. I grew up watching Dick Cavett, not to age myself, and other long-form interview shows. Go back and watch one of my favorite episodes of Phil Donahue. Yes, Phil Donahue, big leftist, progressive guy. He interviewed Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman. And I'm sure you've seen this before. It's on YouTube, and if you haven't, by all means, check it out. Phil, again, is about as progressive as you can get, and yet gave Milton Friedman, who strongly rejects Keynesian philosophy, the economics that is the foundation behind much of leftist policy. And it was a civilized, thought-provoking, and even Donahue's daytime audience seemed to be captured by Friedman's and Donahue's high-level discussion. That's our intent here. You may not agree with every guest, nor should you. But my hope is that I'm able to get the best from those guests, ask the questions that I think most people are thinking, and hopefully find areas where we can agree. After all, listen, we're all Americans. I know we're divided today, but outside of the crazies on Twitter, most of us want our country to do well. And inherently, that means, in turn, we do well. So those are our thoughts here at Whiskey Politics. I thought it was time. We've got a lot of new viewers. Go back. This is episode 236. There's a lot of great episodes with people that I may disagree with, and I certainly agree with, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of those interviews as well. And speaking of interviews, today we are delighted to welcome back Carrie Severino, who is the Chief Counsel and Policy Director of the Judicial Crisis Network. She's a graduate of Harvard Law School and clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas at the Supreme Court of the United States. She is also co-author with Mollie Hemingway on this incredible book, Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court, which goes deep, deep into the Kavanaugh Confirmation. You want to check out our interview with both Mollie and Carrie over at Whiskey Politics. So to get another perspective on the Joe Biden Tara Reade story, welcome back, Carrie. How are you today?
Doing great. Locked up, but doing well otherwise.
So I understand real quickly, you're in Virginia. You guys have a lockdown for what, another couple of years?
Boy, it feels like it. And it sounds like phase one is going to last the rest of the decade. So I think we got to work this out, folks. But we're doing well. Homeschooling 6 kids, and I'm happy my husband gets to work from home, so we get to see a little more of him.
Good.
I just feel for all the people who can't work from. I mean, this is the challenge. All of us doing the commentary, it's easy to, okay, well, we're just dealing with some minor issues where you can work from home and we have to do this over Skype or over Zoom. It's really hard for so many people. So that's what really worries me.
It is, but it's allowing you to write some really good stuff. And again, further to your book, Justice on Trial, you're writing articles about what's going on right now with the Tara Reade, Joe Biden thing, including your Fox News article. Biden's assault allegations, VP candidates, Dems response is a masterclass in hypocrisy. When we take a look at what we're hearing coming out from the left on this, are we in a situation right now where we're seeing that, during the fall 2018 chapter that we were in, which you wrote about in Justice on Trial, are you, the whole believe all women mantra, are we at a point right now where the left is basically stating that just believe all Democrat women?
Yeah. Well, the irony is the women making these accusations are Democrats. I mean, the women both alleging that Joe Biden was just inappropriate with them, and then people like Tara Reade, who says that he was not just inappropriate, but sexually assaulted her. These are Democrat women. I think the question is, believe only women who are accusing Republicans appears to be the standard. And that's a real problem. I think their rediscovery of these notions of due process, of innocent until proven guilty, of actually having a system, of the rule of law is very frustrating, because they were willing to jettison all that, throw it out the window when it came to allegations against a Republican. The idea of having the rule of law means we have a set of rules that we apply to people, whether you like them or not, whether you disagree with them, whether they're your same, group, whether it's your sex, race, whatever. We want to have the same rules across the board, so we're not letting those personal feelings affect the way we judge cases, right? The same thing should be applied here. We shouldn't have a different standard for people who accuse Republicans or Democrats. I'm trying really hard to make sure that I have the same principles. I don't want to go full Kavanaugh on Biden, because I think that was an inappropriate way to deal with someone, even if that was the standard he was advocating himself. It's not a fair standard. I don't think we should go there. It's funny, when he had his interview on Morning Joe recently, he almost cited the wrong standard for himself. I think because it's become so rote to say this. He said, well, we have to respect the women. We have to, a woman who makes an allegation, we have to look into it. But, we take her a presumption that it's correct. And then unless we can prove it otherwise, and then he stopped. Wait a minute. Actually, we look at all the facts and evidence. And what he started to articulate was the standard that unfortunately the left has been applying, at least when Republicans are accused, and that is that we believe it all unless you can definitively prove otherwise. That's not a fair standard. It's not even possible theologically to prove a negative generally, right? So that can't be the standard. It's not the standard in any other case. So Joe Biden is correct in his current standard he's applying, which is that we respect people making accusations, we respect the words of the people who are accused, and then we look at the evidence and the facts to try to make a judgment as to whether it actually happened or not. What was so strange about the way that he's responding to this is that he and then these other Democrats at the same time are somehow coming to the conclusion that, yes, Christine Blasey Ford's allegations and Julie Swetnick's allegations, all these allegations, those ones are believable. Those ones have to be believed. But Tara Reade, well, we've looked at it and we don't think there's enough there. I'm sorry. For me, the jury is still out. I don't think we have enough to say we know that Tara Reade is telling the truth. However, if you think that Christine Blasey Ford, who didn't tell anyone for 30 years almost after the event, who doesn't have any evidence yet, even that she met Brett Kavanaugh, let alone that the allegation that she made happened, that they were in the same place at this party, who has changed her story not over time, but actually within the just month or two of the description of the story, had different versions of how many people were there and who were boys and who were girls and what this party looked like. On the other hand, Tara Reade sounds like she did talk to people, not decades later, but actually in 1993, when it's alleged to have happened. We have evidence from her mother that her mother was concerned about the behavior of Joe Biden to her daughter when she called into the Larry King show and talked about it. Yeah. We have her neighbor, her brother, a friend, all of whom say she told me about this at the time. Now, that's not open and shut either, but if you are going to believe Christine Blasey Ford, hands down, then I don't see how you can discount Tara Reade, who has even more evidence. And you have Democrats who are just desperately trying to distinguish those two cases, but you can't distinguish them because Tara Reade's case is just undeniably stronger than Christine Blasey Ford's.
Well, Christine Blasey Ford, we were talking off camera about this. She couldn't name the exact year of the assault or provide witnesses to corroborate her story. She couldn't provide any of the details regarding about the time of the assault. And we've seen reported here now that there are 6 women that have come forward to corroborate Tara Reade's story. So the question is, why is there such a disconnect between this fact, the fact of 6 corroborated women, and what we were hearing regarding Blasey Ford, which was blown up to nuclear proportions, where it divided the country in the most incredibly divisive cultural thing that I've seen in my lifetime, where you had women screaming, men as well, screaming at the Supreme Court of the United States, banging the doors down.
And every metric, you would think this should be more frustrating. Instead of saying, well, it was a 17-year-old, a drunk 17-year-old who did this, you're saying She's alleging this was a grown man, I think a married man at that point, and in a work environment, which, you know, he should be much more conscious and aware, a U.S. senator who's doing this, you know, all on every metric, it's more disturbing. And I would say not only was no one able to corroborate Christine Blasey Ford's statements, but actually you had people like Leland Kaiser, her good friend, a liberal Democrat who wanted to support her, who not only said, I don't remember this, but later went on to say, I actually came to disbelieve her. This doesn't sound like any party I was at. So you have the people she thought would be her witnesses going the opposite direction and undermining her story. So I just think it is shocking to see these people take such a different position. And it really shows that the outrage, all of the crazy hair on fire screaming we saw during the Kavanaugh confirmation wasn't at the end of the day so much about their position, even on Me Too or on what sexual harassment is and how it should be dealt with, or sexual assault. It turns out it was more about politics than anything else. And that's really sad.
Yeah, so believe all Democrat women, and it's about bad man, orange man getting him out. I want to read an excerpt from your op-ed, again at foxnews.com. While nobody might have guessed it at the time, the Kavanaugh allegation and how it was handled by the left has turned out to be the perfect foil for the Biden allegation. The contrast between the Democrats' outrage in 2018 and their silence in 2020 could not be starker. What are you referring to as the perfect foil here?
Yeah, so the fact that you have these two contrasting allegations that, as I said, are, if anything, Tara Reade's allegations are stronger on every single point: corroboration, length of time, the amount of responsibility that the man being alleged should have been showing at the time. All of these, her allegations should be considered stronger. Doesn't mean either of them we conclude that it definitely happened, but of these two, Tara Reade's are stronger, and yet they are taking the opposite position. And they're saying, oh, we know for sure that this guy is an attempted rapist on the Supreme Court, and Biden, trust me, I know the guy, it's fine, we don't believe her. That's ludicrous, and it shows a real biased double standard. And you have some of the same people and the same personalities, you know, the women that were on the Senate Judiciary Committee who thought this was the worst thing ever if Kavanaugh did it, and yet are taking, frankly, even what he alleges. Kavanaugh is I thought maybe he was going to rape me, and Biden, we're talking, you know, he actually committed an assault in that case, right? This is not just a threatening, maybe he did. So it's really shocking. And then the funny part is too, seeing some of the same people, like Kamala Harris, for example. She was running against Biden at this time last year, right? That's when Tara Reade's first allegations came out, talking about his inappropriate touching with a group of other women who had worked for him and were concerned about the same thing. At that point, when she was running against him for the nomination, Senator Harris thought it's something that really needed to be looked into. She thought he needed to answer for it. It was a real problem. Suddenly, fast forward to 2020, when she is potentially going to be his vice presidential running mate, and you see her covering up for something that's a much more serious allegation. And for a long time, she was refusing to comment on it. Later, she just kind of was excusing him. And we're seeing that from a lot of the women who are in this maybe Biden VP camp. So it's really showing a very crass political calculus, I think, where, you know, if it's a Republican we can attack, we are willing to do anything, no holds barred. If it's a Democrat, and a Democrat that we like and want, maybe are trying to curry favor with, then they're willing to overlook anything. You've got people like Kirsten Gillibrand, who was a longtime champion of, you know, she helped get Senator Franken out of office because she thought what he did, which was, again, a lot less than what's alleged of Joe Biden here, was what she thought it was unconscionable. And now suddenly she's willing to defend Biden. It's just a head scratcher. The only logical answer is, you know, the political calculus and the personal benefit for them is very different this time around.
So when we see somebody like a Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams or whoever is jockeying to be the next women-nominated VP, because that's the most important thing. You know, I was talking with Reade about it last week. You know, I said, why is identity politics the number one priority for you in choosing a vice president? Isn't meritocracy important? And we went around in circles on that. But you know, they're obviously positioning themselves for political purposes. Where is the outrage in the media regarding this hypocrisy? I mean, the idea, you referred to the Mika Brzezinski interview on MSNBC, where Joe Biden, I don't think did himself any favors, by the way. And I want to ask you about that as well, because we've got breaking news today that the Senate has essentially denied to open the records, by the way. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you've heard that, but that's something that's going to be discussed. So essentially, they're saying that we're not going to be opening the records. But where do you think, I mean, where are we hearing from the mainstream media that there is a blatant hypocrisy happening right now? This is self-serving for Stacey Abrams. This is self-serving for Kamala Harris and Gillibrand, whoever it may be. Why aren't they being called out on it, do you think?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. And even if you just look at the length of time that it took to get this story out, from Intercept article, which is interestingly the outlet that broke both the Tara Reade and the Christine Blasey Ford stories initially. You know, for Christine Blasey Ford, it was like 48 hours, and then we're starting to have major things dropping, right? It was a couple weeks for the several weeks from the Intercept article in this for it to get picked up. And I think a lot of people were waiting for it to not happen. And of course, all of this news ended up coming out on Easter Sunday, which is, as you might imagine, not really a big news day. So it was not designed to be the blockbuster news story.
Yeah.
I think one of the most frustrating parts for me is that people are not having their feet held to the fire in terms of these politicians who ought to have to answer those hard questions. Oh, so you don't believe all women, or which women do you believe, or what part of this story do you think is stronger than or less strong than Christine Blasey Ford's story? I think we haven't heard any of them be forced to answer that question. That would be incredibly important to see. And I think it's also interesting. I don't know what's going on with the Senate bureaucracy there that's refusing to release these records, because you have employment documents where both the employer and the employee are saying, yes, release this document. So, I don't know what's going on with the levels of Byzantine bureaucracy, but let me tell you, it's not super surprising coming from DC, where the bureaucracy can gum things up in any possible way. So the big question, of course, remaining, I know Joe Biden doesn't want to do it, but there are more documents from his Senate time at the University of Delaware. He hasn't seemed to want to release those, or at least even search them for her name. I think that would be a valuable thing to do. And if it turns out they don't really have any employment documents there, great, we'll find that out by searching them. But thus far, he hasn't been willing to do that with the documents that are more in his own control. It's frustrating, because those would be really helpful in terms of corroborating some of this story.
It's interesting because it isn't just those on television media, but we're seeing this in relatively mainstream, huge media sources like the Associated Press. They just came out in the last few days and admitted to deleting the reports that they took from Tara Reade regarding that she said that she did make a complaint 27 years ago. She used the words uncomfortable. She didn't use the word sexual harassment. She admitted this because she was really concerned about losing her job. She was concerned about retaliation. And so, but even AP decided that they didn't want to report that. In other words, to corroborate that she actually did file a report against Joe Biden.
Yeah, it's really frustrating to see it not dug into. When it was during the Kavanaugh confirmation, we had every aspect of his life was completely put under a microscope. And we all can recite his yearbook entry, right? I don't know Joe Biden's yearbook entry, but no one's asking. And you had people, friends of his from high school, from college, from law school, who were being trolled for information, people calling off the hook. When Mollie and I were writing Justice on Trial, we talked to a lot of these people who described the atmosphere. You had a whole Facebook group of Yale alumni kind of trying to figure out if there are other allegations that they could make. Anyone hear anything? Come on. People who were emailing former students of him, or just people who had been at the right law schools at the right time saying, have you heard anything, kind of suggesting ideas to them. It was an intense search and hunt on behalf of not only the media, but also Senate staffers and everyone who's trying to dig up anything they could. We're not seeing that. There's a sudden lack of curiosity amongst, obviously, the Democrats who don't want to even know here. And it's funny hearing people like even Joe Biden when he says, I think this should be thoroughly investigated. And then He's willing to make that one request to the Senate. So good for him on that, but he's not willing to release other documents, or at least allow them to be searched, other documents that he does have more in his control. So it's easy for him to say, let's have a full investigation, because let me tell you, the full investigation on the Biden allegations isn't looking anything like what it looked like for Brett Kavanaugh, who had every aspect of his life being laid out for the public to see.
We've got Carrie Severino. She is the president, the chief counsel and policy director of the Judicial Crisis Network with us. And she is also the co-author with Mollie Hemingway of Justice on Trial, the Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Supreme Court. You know, when we had both you and Mollie on to talk about this book, which is phenomenal, by the way, pertinent today as it was 15, 16 months ago, I guess, when we talked about it. Unfortunately, we talked in the last interview and you said, be careful, be very, very careful, left. You might reap what you sow here. Is this that with what we're saying with Reade?
Yeah, a lot of people are pointing to those words from Justice Kavanaugh. He said, you sow the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind, in that biblical quotation.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation. Shortly after I was nominated, the Democratic Senate leader said he would, quote, oppose me with everything he's got. A Democratic senator on this committee publicly referred to me as evil. Evil. Think about that word. And said that those who supported me were, quote, complicit in evil. Another Democratic senator on this committee said, quote, Judge Kavanaugh is your worst nightmare. A former head of the Democratic National Committee said, quote, Judge Kavanaugh will threaten the lives of millions of Americans for decades to come. I understand the passions of the moment, but I would say to those senators, your words have meaning. Millions of Americans listened carefully to you. Given comments like those, is it any surprise that people have been willing to do anything, to make any physical threat against my family, to send any violent email to my wife, to make any kind of allegation against me and against my friends, to blow me up and take me down? You sowed the wind. For decades to come, I fear that the whole country will reap the whirlwind.
I think this is part of what it is. If we decide to have a system where there isn't a due process and a presumption of innocence, then effectively anyone can accuse anyone of anything, and you have no defense. And there's no way you can prove, again, you can't prove a negative. So I think that's a little what he's talking about. Now, it remains to be seen how people are going to end up handling this Biden allegation, but I do think it's blowing up a lot more than they expected. I think a lot of people are seeing it. You're seeing even groups on the left who are being forced to take positions they hoped they could just avoid talking about it altogether. Just ignore it, move on, nothing to see here. But they're being shamed into covering it, shamed into talking about it, because the contrast is just so egregious. And I think it is going to come back to hurt Joe Biden. Again, we don't know what the outcome is. We don't know whether this is going to end up looking more likely than not that it happened. And we don't know at the end of the day whether people will say, okay, that, this is an almost 30-year-old allegation, I still will vote for him. I don't know. But they at least are going to have to deal with the question. And I think for a lot of voters who might be thinking, well, I want someone who is going to have a transparent approach to these things. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden is not showing that quite yet right now. He did. I remember during his the debate when Michael Bloomberg, where he had that whole back and forth about NDAs with Liz Warren. And he was right up there saying, why aren't you release all the files? Why aren't you releasing things? I think now it's kind of sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander.
Yeah. There's an article that came out in National Review this week from John Hirschauer, and he calls it the Biden-Kavanaugh double standard, which is very similar to what you're talking about in your piece as well. He says that Joe Biden is being treated as an individual, a man that is accused of a specific crime that either did or did not occur. Brett Kavanaugh was treated as a totem, an anti-hero, an anti-messianic stand-in for all of history's various straight white men who got away with it. Isn't that essentially what we're looking at here between the dichotomy between the Kavanaugh and the Biden situation, that this is in fact just they are icons for a political movement?
That was unfortunately a lot of what we saw during the Kavanaugh confirmation. And Mollie and I wrote about the kind of strange logic you would get from some people who would say things like, well, I was assaulted when I was in college or something, or in high school, and they would tell their story and they would say, that's why I believe Christine Blasey Ford. And that isn't actually a non sequitur. You might say, well, that's why I think her story is plausible because something like that happened to me. Okay, but it doesn't mean that happened. Someone did X to me, therefore I believe that someone else did X to you. It does not logically follow. And it's unfortunate because during the Kavanaugh confirmation, they were more than willing to just say, oh yes, if you don't believe Christine Blasey Ford, it must mean that you are a rape apologist and you hate all women and you think it's fine that young men go around getting drunk and raping women. That couldn't be farther from the truth, right? I know a lot of women who were saying, I was sexually assaulted, but I don't think it's fair to blame another man for what happened to me. So I think, again, treating him as an individual is a little late now, the right approach to bring to these allegations. The approach that's being brought Joe Biden is like, hey, let's look at the allegations in this specific case. Let's look at the evidence in this specific case and see if it holds up. That is the correct standard. What's so frustrating, and I'm very much worried about for the next time a Republican is accused, whether it's the next Supreme Court nominee or whoever, is we can't live in a country where you have one standard for your political friends and one standard for your political enemies. That is just totally contrary to the rule of law. And we've got to stand up for that. So I would love those who are the latecomers to the I love due process camp to stand up and acknowledge, okay, I give up. Let's have due process for everyone. Otherwise, they just keep on switching the rules back and forth every single time the party of the accused person switches.
And here's the thing, and I find this with a lot of people that I know that are right of center, conservative, libertarian, Republican, whatever it may be, the consistency with them is exactly what we saw with 2018. It is the changes that we're seeing from our friends left of center right now that are using this as a political cudgel. They used it as a political cudgel, and now they're trying to prevent it from being used as a political cudgel for the guy that they like. And so the idea of due process, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Sixth Amendments, which we saw, was just basically thrown out on its head in 2018 with Kavanaugh. Carrie, is this an opportunity, do you think, to teach those people that are politically motivated to ignore it, to wake up and realize how important it is that if Me Too as a movement has turned into a political movement, that there are a lot of innocent people that are getting run over by this?
Yeah, well, I think making sure that people see what's happening and they don't forget their history is key to this, because you could the about faces and the changing your position only works if people are willing to forget or cast a blind eye to what you just said about someone on the other side, a minute ago, and now you're switching position, right? So I think it is incumbent on us to make this very clear, remind people. You do not forget the history. They took a different position here than they did now, and so we have to make sure that next time, if they're holding due process for Joe Biden, which is the right thing to do, we need to make sure that when a Republican is alleged of God knows what next, then we're going to say, yep, you need to have due process there as well. And unfortunately, a lot of people are willing to say, well, I don't even, it doesn't matter to me so much because this is someone I agree with, not someone I disagree with. I think, for example, Anita Hill had this great Meet the Press interview during the Clinton investigation, saying, and at that time it had already become pretty clear that he had definitely been inappropriate, for lack of a better word, with women that he had worked with and many other women. And she pretty much excused it. And she said, well, I think, you have to kind of look at what this guy is doing overall for the political, world. And I think there's a lot of other decisions he's making that help women. And so more or less saying, I don't care as long as I agree with you on policy issues. That is atrocious. And I worry that that's exactly what we're seeing here. So people who are happy to attack someone they disagree with and want to defend someone they agree with, it shows that they're not really concerned about the sexual assault, which they should be. We should be concerned as a society about sexual harassment, about sexual assault.
Absolutely. I don't care if you're on the left or the right.
They're only concerned about the politics, and that's a tragedy.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. I was talking with Mo Vella the other day regarding this, Biden's senior advisor, and I was on a television show a couple of months ago, and they classified me as anti-Me Too. I said, I'm not anti-Me Too. I'm against anybody using power for their own personal benefit when it takes taking advantage of an employee or whatever it may be. They should be held accountable. I'm against the idea of just erasing due process because it's politically convenient. But that takes us to the legal realm. And you graduated Harvard Law School. You clerked for Clarence Thomas at the Supreme Court of the United States. Lisa Bloom, who is the daughter of famed feminist attorney Gloria Allred. She's a feminist attorney herself. She said that I believe Biden sexually assaulted Tara Reade, but still support him because I still have to fight Trump. As a lawyer, as somebody that was trained by the best of the best in this country, when you hear that, what do you think?
Well, I think it falls in that exact same category here as what Anita Hill said. Again, on TV and acknowledging it out loud, that this isn't really at the end of the day about sexual assault then. She's not as concerned about that. She really just wants to make sure that her guy wins. But, I have to say she's not the only one who has made that calculus. Tara Reade herself acknowledges she voted for Joe Biden as VP when she voted for Obama. So there are people who can make that calculation. I think that's fair, but to pretend that you believe one and don't believe the other when the evidence points exactly the opposite way. I think that is at least an honest assessment, saying, look, I believed Christine Blasey Ford and I believe Biden, and I believe Tara Reade, but I'm gonna still vote for Biden. At least she's being honest. What frustrates me are the people who are saying, oh no, these unsubstantiated claims are absolutely 100% true, and these unsubstantiated or somewhat substantiated claims I can't believe because I like Joe Biden. That is much less logically and intellectually honest. So kudos to her for at least acknowledging what the calculation is.
Well, she's being transparent. And I assume she doesn't think that acknowledging her bias is a problem because of the echo chambers that she lives in. But from a legal perspective, as a lawyer, again, trained at Harvard Law School, that should shake you to the core, doesn't it? Because essentially she's stating that, the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment be damned. This is all about Orange Man bad.
Well, she's at least, this is true. She still should be giving him the benefit of the doubt under those principles. I agree.
She's an attorney.
Yeah, she's saying I'm going to be consistently anti-due process across the board, which,
that's an interesting perspective.
But it isn't in keeping with some of our foundational American values. Again, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendment, all of those protections for defendants that we really value in our country, and that can be frustrating because we know that, thankfully, the vast majority of people who get brought into courts and have these protections are guilty. I mean, it would be a really bad world if they weren't, because then we'd be trying a lot of people who are in fact innocent of the crimes. But we still owe them all these constitutional protections of due process. This is obviously not a court of law, but then Kavanaugh wasn't either, right? They said this is a job interview. It's different. Look, we're interviewing someone to be the leader of the free world. we're interviewing someone to be the president of the United States. He has a whole lot more unilateral authority than any one Supreme Court justice does. So if it was a job interview that gets to throw out the due process, I don't see how you get a different position.
So the whataboutism that immediately comes up from the supporters of Joe Biden and all of this is obviously Donald Trump himself. He had 18 women come out and suggest that he assaulted them. And there's been no proof, and there's not been any really any level of seriousness taken to most of them. But when you saw, for example, Stormy Daniels, that was taken very seriously. It was in the media every single day. The walls are closing in, and again, the media doesn't like to report the fact that a year later, after all of this, she admitted, and you can find it on Google, Washington Examiner and such, that she actually made up a lot of what was stated. But so talk to me a little bit about the whataboutism right now that we're hearing from the left about Donald Trump, because that is there. Instead of defending Joe Biden or defending due process or whatever the legal situation is, it's going back against Trump, and you guys are just as guilty, and we should just move on.
When we saw this a little bit, I remember watching the lead-in to his interview on MSNBC the other day, where they at the initial, before the interview started, they outlined what the evidence was and how she had changed her story, but how some people had corroborated it beforehand. And then they spent, I think, more than they had talked about Joe Biden up to that point entirely, detailing every single allegation against Donald Trump. That's a total non sequitur. You know, if you were dealing in a court of law, could you say, oh, well, my client's accused of this, but look what that other guy is accused of, all these other things. I mean, it's utterly irrelevant to the question of what actually happened with Joe Biden and Tara Reade in 1993. It has no bearing on it whatsoever. It also leaves out the fact that, you know, some of these allegations against Trump fall into a similar category as allegations against Joe Biden, which is he was really inappropriate and kind of leering at me or saying, I mean, there's a lot of weird things that Joe Biden has been alleged to have said to women, or ways that he has touched them. They're not including those in the list. None of those on, you know, in terms of the Trump allegations or the Biden allegations have been proven either. So, you know, at this point, I think they're all kind of in that limbo. It was interesting to see that Trump's own response to Biden actually was, even though he's obviously his political opponent right now, his likely opponent for the presidency, he didn't jump on the bandwagon of, yeah, this happened. He said, well, you know, people make false allegations. I know that better than anyone, and we'll see what happens with it. And I think that's the proper response, to have a more balanced opinion on all of them. But yeah, I'm sorry, however much that, you know, and that may be part of people's analysis in terms of, you know, which one of them they prefer, but that doesn't have anything to do with what actually happened in 1993. I mean, Donald Trump wasn't alleged to be in that room, so I don't know how he's relevant to what happened between Joe Biden and Tara Reade.
Are you taking bets on whether or not Donald Trump stays consistent with that approach?
I have to say, he has been consistently in favor of due process for people who were accused. He was with Kavanaugh. I mean, a lot of people were talking about how would any other Republican president have stuck behind their nominee, and I think a lot of people said no. You know, I don't think so. And he really said, you know what? I think we want to make sure we're being fair to the nominee, and I'm going to stand behind him. And you know, amazingly, he's saying the same thing even about his major political opponent in Joe Biden. So good for him.
I hope he stays consistent with it, because it's the right approach right now. I know there are discussions happening right now in the inner sanctum of the White House on how to deal with this. I think the way he just wants to step outside of this, he was accused, and he says falsely accused. He understands that. And so for him to jump on Biden right now, I don't think would be a good look. But let's go back to the breaking news today regarding the fact that the Secretary of the Senate turned down the Biden request to search for the records of any complaint filed by Tara Reade. How do you feel about that? Should the Senate open it up? And also, what about the University of Delaware?
So if I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this. So we have personnel records that the Senate holds, that they are saying neither the employer who's being accused here and who is being complained against allegedly in this in whatever complaint, if they find one, or the accuser who is the employee, both sides are saying, can you please release these records? I'm scratching my head going, what are the records for if they can't be released by, if neither the accuser or the accusee can even see them? So, it's just, you gotta scratch your head. That said, this, the crazy bureaucracy that goes on in the government, and I've heard some people say it's even worse in the executive branch than the legislative branch. So, wow, it strikes me as unfortunately all too typical for what happens in the kind of red tape you accumulate in the bureaucracy in DC. But I will say that the University of Delaware records don't have that same type of red tape because they're Biden's own personal records, right? Now, I think part of the challenge is they haven't been fully cataloged yet. We have seen reports that Biden operatives have been seen going to the University of Delaware, presumably to kind of start looking and seeing, okay, what is there? Biden said publicly that there were no personnel records in that, and that may be true, but if that's the case, then I would say, okay, fine, search the records and see if her name comes up. Again, this is one of those strange contrasts with Kavanaugh. Remember, during the Kavanaugh confirmation, they were saying, we cannot rest. We will not know enough about this person until we have seen literally every single piece of paper that came through the Bush White House, even if he didn't have anything to do with it. And when the government said, well, some of that stuff is confidential. So, oh, this is ridiculous. You're hiding things. Joe Biden, on the other hand, is saying kind of the same thing, and there's not even stuff that's responsive in here, and why are we looking through it? And suddenly, everyone's like, oh, that sounds reasonable. We'll just, we're going to walk away from this. If there are, I think searching just to find out if there are employee files, I would hope would be somewhat straightforward, and I think it's discouraging that they're not going to even look and see if that type of file is included there, especially now that the Senate has kind of put the kibosh on looking through those files.
I think credit where credit is due is Mika Brzezinski. She said, why can't you just do a search just for the name, Tara Reade? Forget all of the other documents about presidential privilege and everything else. We don't want to know what happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina, whatever, they're dealing with. And that's the Clinton administration. But the thing is that my point being is that, why can't you go in and just do a basic Boolean search for her name and bring up any of those records? Why is that confidential?
Well, I have no idea how many of them are actually digitized at this point, so that could be part of it. But again, I would think there'd be ways where there might be a category of documents. I'm hoping they're not all just shuffled together. It's like, okay, here's my files on national security. Here's the employee files, or at least you can narrow it down to 1993-ish, right? So it's not like you have to go into the entire Obama administration, for example. That's not relevant because that's not when it would have come up. So I think it seems to me there are ways you could practically make a search. And I agree, kudos to Mika for going back to that a few times, because he clearly, and maybe irrationally, didn't seem to want to go there. And now this kind of attempted change of subject of, well, the Senate's going to look into it, they're all over there anyway, is kind of falling flat because the Senate's saying, we're not going to give you the documents anyway. Again, I wonder if the documents can't be later accessed by anyone, what's the point of even keeping them? Like, why do we even have them on file? It's just one big circular file there where it goes into a memory hole. That seems like a strange process, but I can't pretend to understand the Byzantine Senate procedure that might go into the confidentiality rules there.
Yeah. So, Carrie, what we're hearing right now from most mainstream media and the left, and I heard it last week on my interview with Mo Vela, a senior advisor to Joe Biden, was that the New York Times, essentially with their article, it was more or less down the middle from my perspective, but he believes that it exonerated, and we're hearing that in the mainstream media right now. Did the New York Times exonerate Biden?
Right. Well, not according to the New York Times. It's funny. I'm sure it was an unusual thing that they had to do and come out and say, but the Biden campaign so vociferously has been saying, oh yes, case closed, the New York Times exonerated us. And you've seen people like Stacey Abrams, who was apparently reading off of Biden talking points when she also was, oh yeah, the New York Times, they exonerated. Sorry, go back and read the article. no such thing. I mean, the article says we interviewed a bunch of people. We didn't find similar allegations. So they did say that, but that doesn't say anything as to what actually happened between Tara Reade and Biden. It also was really interesting that they keep on going back to that article, because that article is a very strange case of the effectiveness of the Biden campaign at strong-arming the media into even changing the story. So there was a line originally in the article that said, we didn't find any similar allegations about sexual misconduct, although there were people who said they were made uncomfortable with the way that Biden had touched him. And that's kind of, I mean, everyone is familiar with these allegations. You can find internet memes of Biden awkwardly touching women in inappropriate places or in inappropriately close. There are some other allegations of offensive things he may have said to women. He's sort of known for putting his foot in his mouth and may have done so in truly inappropriate ways. We don't know, but some of these are on camera, so it's pretty clear. They took that language out. They just said we didn't find any similar allegations, and then cut the sentence right there. That was really surprising to me, both to see that they were willing to edit it on behalf of a presidential campaign, and then to see that they later basically acknowledged that. So it seems kind of funny that that's the article that the Biden campaign is placing all of its emphasis on, when even the article that was very favorable to them to the extent of editing the text to make it more positive to Joe Biden says, yeah, but we didn't say you weren't guilty here.
Yeah. Last question for you, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time once again with us. What do you think the forecast is going to be for the Me Too movement, which I think has turned into a political movement from all of this?
Well, unfortunately, I think that the Me Too movement was really damaged by going overboard on the Kavanaugh confirmation. And I wonder if this is going to be, how that's going to factor in there. I think a lot of people were concerned because while I would hope that almost every American is very concerned about wanting to make sure that sexual assault and sexual harassment are not happening, that there aren't these power differentials like were being described in the Weinstein case, where an employer is abusing his employees in that way, and that unfortunately came out in several other cases around the same time. Everyone should want that to end, right? But what we're seeing in the way that it was gone so overboard in Kavanaugh is that people are starting to pull back and say, wait a minute, hold on, maybe we need to second guess whether, or re-question whether we need to look at due process. And I think this Biden allegation may play into that as well, in terms of the kind of making sure we avoid the overcorrection of, we shouldn't just jump to the conclusion then that every man is guilty, just as we shouldn't before have jumped to the conclusion that every woman is making things up. We know that the truth is somewhere in between, and we have to make sure that we're looking at each case on its own facts so that we're doing justice to both accuser and accused in these cases. So, maybe optimistically, this is an opportunity for those on the left to recognize that there's more sides to this story than they had realized. What I would hope is that they would be willing to come out transparently and acknowledge that, you know what, we applied the wrong standard for Kavanaugh, and we're sorry. Yeah. That's what I want to hear, because otherwise, the next time a Republican is accused, I fear that we're just going to go back to that same overcorrection in the other direction. And at the end of the day, that's really bad for our system of the rule of law.
Paging Alyssa Milano, white courtesy phone. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you taking the time. Tell everybody where they could find you and your book, please, because it's a fantastic read.
Right. Justice on Trial is on Amazon.com. It's at Barnes & Noble's. You can't go to your bookstore in person, but it's all over online, right? We've got an audio book. We've got Kindle copies as well. And so if you're looking for quarantine reading, there you go. And you can compare and contrast with how things are doing right now. And you can find me on Twitter at JCN Severino. I also blog at Bench Memos blog, National Review Online. And you can find the Judicial Crisis Network at judicialnetwork.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and greatly appreciate it. And again, everybody, do read this book. It is a page turn. It's almost like a thriller. And then you realize, oh my God, this actually just happened. So it's one of those books that you'll put away in a couple of days, and highly recommend it. Carrie Severino, everybody check her out online as well. Thank you so much, Carrie, and look forward to having you back on again down the road. Take care.
Thanks.
And thank you to our viewers and listeners here at Whiskey Politics. Greatly appreciate you taking the time to check us out and listen to our show. And if you are new, you haven't subscribed to us over at YouTube, please find the link below. You can subscribe to us directly on YouTube. That way you don't miss any of our episodes. You can also find us at Apple Podcasts. And if you would like to help others find us, you can give us a 5-star rating and a quick comment. That helps the algorithms out there in Google land. And also you can find us at ricochet.com. It's a great community, a lot of fantastic writers and members, and other great podcasts as well. So check us out there at Ricochet. And we're going to be back again very soon. I believe our next interview is slated for Dave Rubin. Hopefully we can get him to our studio, Whiskey Politics studio, and that way we can sit down and have a great discussion, so you don't want to miss that. And again, very special thanks to Carrie Severino for joining us today here at Whiskey Politics. We'll be back again real soon. Take care. Stay healthy, everybody. Cheers.